Welcome back, guys, and thanks for checking out another video. I'm here at my shop today, and I don't have any dyno appointments, and I thought I would do something a little different. I never really do the vlog style stuff, and you know what? I like vlogs. I love watching other YouTubers. I watch that stuff for entertainment, and you know what? I thought I'd give it a try. Let me know what you think. So I'm here at my shop. I don't have any dyno appointments, and there's a bunch of little things I need to take care of. I need to work on the RSX. I got it up and running in the last video. There's a few little things that need to be taken care of, like the idle air controller wasn't working. I think I sorted that out and I have that over on my bench. And I'm gonna show you guys what I think I found is the issue for why it wasn't working. And there's also a couple other little things I want to address. So this car has always just been a fun car for me. I don't use it as transportation. It's just, I do stupid things with it. It's the hooning car for me. I used it for all my two-step videos and the crackle tuning, and I'm using it for this all-wheel drive conversion. And it's cool. It's gonna be fun. I just do fun stuff with this car. And one of the things I want to play around with is the rolling anti-lag. I'm gonna try to set up rolling anti-lag on this car, wire it up to basically one of the buttons on the steering wheel, wire that up, and then set it all up while I'm doing the tuning video and show you guys how to set that up if you're interested in it. I don't recommend doing it. It's not good for your car. You could break your stuff. Do it at your own risk, but you know what? People ask me all the time. I will do a video on how to set it up and do it at your own risk, but because it's your car, have fun with it, do whatever you like. So today, sort out the idle air controller, wire up the switch that I want to use for the rolling anti-lag. I also want to disable the clutch switch for starting. The car has a competition twin disc clutch, and it's really not a good idea to be like pushing on the clutch and starting with the twin disc. You can do damage to your thrust bearings and things like that in the engine. So I'm just going to disable the clutch switch so that when you start the car, you don't have to push the clutch all the way to the floor. So I'm going to take care of that. One more thing. I get asked all the time about sway bars, especially for this car, and what to do about sway bars because it's a K24, and a K24 swap with a sway bar hits the headers and all that stuff. So even before I started this all-wheel drive turbo project, I got asked all the time, what did I do about the front sway bar? Because the K24 motor is taller, and if you run a good header, the header hits the sway bar, and that's an issue. So originally I removed the sway bar completely just to not deal with that issue because you can't run the sway bar if you have a header and a K24. What I had told other people but never actually got around to doing myself was you can technically run a CRV sway bar. So right here, I have an RSX sway bar. This is the original one off my car. And then I have a CRV sway bar, which is off of one of the cars I parted out to get all the bits and pieces to do the all-wheel drive swap. I think it's like technically a 2003 or 2004 front sway bar. And you'll notice there's a big difference. So this hump is on the regular RSX sway bar. There's no hump here. And because there's no hump, this piece goes underneath the header. And technically you can run one of these sway bars on an RSX if you're gonna have a header issue. I've told other customers this and they've done it and it's worked out really well. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do it on this car. I'm gonna lift up the car and show you what I mean, because the way the exhaust is run now, it hits even this sway bar. So unfortunately, no sway bar on my RSX. Additionally, people have been asking, what about a rear sway bar with the all-wheel drive setup? This is the original RSX sway bar off this car, and it no longer fits because it won't connect to the trailing arms, the CRV trailing arms that I use to convert this thing to all-wheel drive. I don't know if Element's different. It realistically probably isn't, because when I test fit this sway bar is going to hit the rear drive shafts. So no solution at the moment to run a rear sway bar on this car when it's all-wheel drive. However, I was talking to Red from Gravy Built Racing, who is an all-wheel drive expert in these chassis. Believe he is working out a solution, a bracket or a brace to reinstall some sort of rear sway bar. I'm not sure if that's ready yet. I think it's close. If you're interested in that, maybe hit him up on Instagram Gravy Built. I will try to link it in the description. I know he has something in the works for a rear sway bar for RSXs that are all-wheel drive. Why don't I lift the car up, show you what I'm talking about in the front. All right, guys, I have the car up in the air, and I will try to do my best to explain what I was talking about. So underneath the car, the sway bar normally bolts up. There's 2 bolt holes right there, and same on the other side. And then the sway bar connects to the front control arms, comes along here, and then normally would go up and around in that space, and like your exhaust system would pass through. And that's the issue, is basically when you install a K24 and you have a header, all that stuff gets moved up higher and it hits the top of that sway bar there. But if you run a CRV sway bar, it basically goes flat across here. So if you run a CRV sway bar, you don't have to worry about your header and K24 swaps and stuff like that. It just all bolts in. And you can usually get those CRV sway bars for pretty cheap. So yeah, that's what I've been telling people that have asked me about sway bars. I figured I would include it in this video. My issue now is the way we ended up having to run the exhaust system, because I did want to run an exhaust system. The sway bar hits it here, so I can't run a sway bar at all. So this car is not going to have any front sway bar at all. In the rear, so I got the rear sway bar over here, and we'll take it to the back here. So normally a sway bar would bolt up right there and then connect to the trailing arms. The issue is normally, like, the length of this sway bar sticks in pretty far, and I believe would used to connect somewhere further in on the RSX. And now when you try to reinstall this sway bar, it hits here. Unfortunately, I don't think I kept the original CRV rear sway bar. Unfortunately, I can't seem to find it in my pile of parts. But the rear CRV sway bar would connect here. It's a bit shorter, but I guess it doesn't bolt up properly to these locations, is what I've been hearing. But this is where I think Red's gonna come in. I believe he's coming up with a solution to fix that. So stay tuned for that. If he does, maybe I'll try to get one in my hands and show you guys what it's all about. So anyways, that's all I wanted to really say about sway bars. I do have my throttle body and idle air controller all apart over here. So I have my K-tuned 72mm throttle body that I'm running on this car. I used to be running the stock RSX throttle body, but my friends K-tuned hooked me up with a really nice 72mm throttle body with basically the universal bolt pattern. It can work on either an RBC or an original RSX intake manifold. It has dual bolt patterns, so you don't have to run an adapter. Like normally you'd have to run something like this adapter if you wanted to run an RBC and the stock original RSX throttle body. But K-Tune's throttle body has both bolt patterns, so you no longer have to run that adapter, which is cool. Anyways, idle air controller. So this is the idle air controller off my car. I took it off of the throttle body, and one of my friends who originally installed the throttle body was nice enough. He painted the idle air controller. However, it had a bit of overspray inside, and it had jammed up this little guy. And this little thing inside is what controls or regulates the air coming in, and it has to spin perfectly freely. And there was a bit of overspray or debris or something that had like caused this to stick, and it was stuck in the full open position. That's why my idle was all crazy. So it's all cleaned out. It spins super freely now, so that should fix the problem. And what I was mentioning about how these cars, when they sit for a while, they get stuck. I see it all the time. Guys will bring in fresh swaps. They've adjusted the swap and they assume it's the tune causing the problem with idle, but it's not. This was an extra throttle body I had lying around, and I pulled off the idle air controller, and you can see how like corroded and stuff it is inside, and this one looks like it's seized. So eventually I'll probably clean this one up and have it as a spare, but this one's working. This one's all working now, and I'll just put it back together. you do have to cut off the screws basically. It has a weird 5-point to get this apart. So just a heads up to take off these screws. Normally I put like a slot in them and then I can use a flathead screwdriver to take it out. Anyways, yeah, that's about it. So I'm gonna put that all back together and get the car back up and running with the throttle body and make sure the idle is good. And then I think I'm gonna dive into defeating the clutch interlock switch so I don't have to push the clutch when I start the car. And then I'll start looking into figuring out if I can find the wires for the steering wheel buttons, technically the cruise control buttons, so I can use those buttons as my input for requesting rolling anti-lag. So when I bring the car down, we'll get started with that. All right, so I've temporarily removed my Recaro just to make it easier to work in here. But basically what I want to do is I want to, like I said, defeat the clutch switch or interlock switch so that I can basically just start the car right now. I can't start the car unless I push the clutch, and it's really not good for engines that are running like super heavy clutches, twin discs or whatever it may be. If you have a really heavy clutch and you have to push the clutch all the way to the floor to release the interlock, it's hard on the thrust bearings of the engine. So as a preventative maintenance type thing, I'm gonna defeat that interlock. And then also, I'm gonna start trying to figure out which wire, and I haven't decided which button I wanna use, but like these are all momentary switches technically. And I gotta trace them down and see, but basically what I wanna be able to do is while I'm driving, I wanna be able to push one of these buttons, which will engage or tell the ECU that I want rolling anti-lag. And what you do is like, so you push it, you floor it, and it's got basically 2-step while you're rolling. It'll be helping spool the turbo and getting ready for a rolling launch. So you basically push it, floor the throttle, all kinds of pops and bangs, and spools the turbo. And then as soon as you let off, you go and you should have full boost. It's mostly meant for like roll racing and whatnot. So I don't know, should be fun. I'm just, like I said, this car is purely for fun. And if I break it, I don't really care. It's because it's not my only form of transportation. But for you guys, if this is your only form of transportation, I don't advise doing anything like this. It's more important that you can get to work or get home and whatnot. So what I always tell people is, if you are at all worried about damaging anything, don't do this kind of stuff. That's my warning, okay? So clutch interlock switch, let's see. Let's turn this off. Like I said, what I want to do is defeat the interlock. And there are 2 clutch switches down here. And it's this one, I believe. So that is the clutch interlock. And you can cut it and twist it together. For now, I'll probably just stick a jumper wire in here and maybe tape it up, secure it somehow. Let's take care of that. All right, guys. I have a jumper wire temporarily installed in that. So I will make that permanent eventually, but let's take a look. Technically the car shouldn't start. I don't have a throttle body on it, and there's no map sensor connected or anything. It's gonna throw a check engine light probably. But anyways, all I wanna do is prove that it'll crank over now. So jumper wire, key on, yeah, engine turns over. So now I can start the car without pushing the clutch and without potentially damaging the thrust bearings in the engine. So next step, figure out this wiring and figure out which button I want to use for the rolling anti-lag. And once I figure out the wiring, then I gotta run a wire over to the K-Pro and wire it in. And then maybe we'll test it out, make sure it works. Not like actually try to engage rolling anti-lag, but you can basically watch inputs when you load up the K-Pro software to make sure that the input's working. So let me take care of that and we'll see how it turns out. All right, so I think I figured it out. Even though this is an idea I've had for a long time, I've never gotten around to doing it. So I had to actually look up a wiring diagram for the cruise control. And surprisingly, these buttons send 12 volts, which is unique. Most inputs send out a ground signal. Very few send 12 volts. That's fine. We can work with that because I don't want to rewire everything to send ground. We're just gonna work with what we have here. And the reason why that's kind of unique and sort of a problem, but not really a problem, is that we have to hijack an input from a different system on the car that is not being really used. And most of them send a ground signal. There's only one that sends 12 volts. It is the brake switch, and that the ECU is expecting a 12 volt signal. So that when the ECU sees 12 volts through that input, it's me pushing this button and requesting rolling anti-lag, and technically it will be also requesting two-step. That is the plan. I did find the wiring, and the wiring is back here. I've unplugged it. The wire I'm gonna use is the light green with the black tracer. That is the wire for this switch, which is the resume Excel switch. The funny thing about the way this is wired is when you push this button, it sends 12 volts to the cruise control module. When you push this button, it sends 12 volts to the cruise control module. But when you push the cancel button, it's basically sending 12 volts on both, as if you were pushing both. So the reason why I mentioned that is technically, if you push this button, it'll request rolling anti-lag, and if you push this button, it will also request rolling anti-lag. So I have to wire this all up. I'm gonna run the wire from back there over to the ECU to pin E22 as the brake input, and then set that all up in the K-Pro software. One thing I'm curious about is what's gonna happen once I actually test out the cruise control, if it's gonna do anything. I don't think it will, because I've technically like removed that from the engine bay, the actuator in there, so it shouldn't do anything. But I'm definitely gonna push the button once this is all done and see what happens if it does anything different. Worst case scenario, I will defeat this switch as well, just unplug it from behind. So all that being said, I think it's time to wire up the input for the rolling anti-lag. I'm gonna hijack the wire over there, send it over to the ECU, which is over there, and I'll take care of that, and we'll see how it goes. All right, wiring all taken care of. Basically, I cut the original wire on this side from the cruise control wire that was for the button of the resume Excel button, and ran a new wire all the way over to the ECU. And at the ECU side, I actually unpinned the original wire that goes into E22, and then put a new pin in it from a donor harness that I have. I like to try to avoid cutting the actual engine wiring harness at the ECU as much as possible. And so that's what I did there. So the wiring's all taken care of. I have to put the trim pieces back on, and then after that, reinstall the seat, and then install the throttle body with the cleaned out idle air controller, and we should be ready to start the car up again and see if the idle air controller is working, and then just test to see if the input that I've set up with the cruise control button works. So let's see how that turns out. All right, I think we're all set. I have the throttle body all reinstalled. Everything is reconnected. Power to the car is on. I have my laptop up and running. It's connected to the K-Pro, and we are ready to get started. Let's see how it turns out. I'm hoping the idle is all sorted out now. So, key on, and one thing I noticed, now that I key it on, the gas gauge is working and registering basically full. I don't think it's technically full. I think this is a 9-gallon tank, and I've only put about 7 gallons in. So I'll have to see how the gas gauge works out. But at least now the gauge on the cluster is working, which is cool. So key on. I'm gonna set the data logger on, and everything seems to be working. I synced up the throttle TPS settings. Before we start it up though, why don't we check to make sure the button I wired up over here is working and that the K-Pro software is registering it. So like I said before, we're using the brake switch, which is down here, brake switch, and it's registering off. And if I go and push this button or this button, it should register. So let's start with this one. Push the button. Yep. Seems to be working. Right now, cruise control is off. Doesn't seem to light up anymore, which is cool. Let's try it again. So it's pushed now. Let's see. Seems to still work. So it doesn't seem to matter if that's pressed or not. Let's try the cancel button. Cancel button. Yep, it seems to do it like I thought it would. All right, well, at least all that stuff's working. Time to start it up. So I have disabled the clutch interlock, so I should be able to just start cranking it. There we go. And it's idling at a reasonable RPM now, which is good. I should jump out of the car, check the engine, make sure everything is okay, there's no leaks. So let's check it out. So far so good. I'm curious about the fuel pressure. It seems to be bouncing around a bunch, but it looks like I'm in the 60 to 70 range with this pump. So the pump might be overpowering the stock regulator a bit. Let's see what happens when I flip it a bit. Yeah, so it seems pretty stable at 60 PSI, which is pretty good. But I'm gonna continue to let it warm up. Hopefully the idle comes down to where it should be. So far so good, everything looks good. I'm going to continue letting it warm up, and we'll see if the idle air controller brings it down to the 850 that it's supposed to be at once it's all warm. All right, well, you know what? Everything looks good, guys. The car's come up to temp. It's at 180. Air fuels look really good. Everything is running pretty nicely. No leaks. Throttle response is pretty good. I know I said I wouldn't test the rolling anti-lag, but what I have done is kind of set it up, so I'm gonna do a little test to see how it works. It's not gonna be full throttle, but I am going to check to see how it's working. So like, I have it set low. I think I set it to like 2500 maybe. So I'm gonna bring it up, and then I'm gonna push the button. And there it goes. It's holding it at 2500. So I am gonna set all that up on the dyno, and that'll all be in the next video when I'm dynoing it. But I think we are ready to finally get this car off the hoist and see if it'll move under its own power, all-wheel drive, and get it over onto my dyno. So let's see how that goes. Alright guys, well after about 1.5 years, the RSX is finally up and running. It moved under its own power. All 4 wheels are spinning. Right now it's still all-wheel drive, and it's super cool that I was able to take it from its spot on the hoist and get it over here onto my dyno, because it actually had to go outside, and if you saw in the clip, the rear wheels were actually spinning in the snow. And what's cool is the car didn't get stuck in the snow. I actually have a video, like a really old video, where I was just like pulling this car out of my garage, and there was like a tiny bit of snow in front of my garage, and the car got stuck. Now, with the amount of snow that's outside and this all-wheel drive setup, even with these same summer tires, the car had no issues. It didn't get stuck outside, so that was kind of cool. But anyways, that's about it for this video. The next one is gonna be me dyno tuning this car. I gotta get it, I gotta disconnect the drive shaft so it's only front wheel drive, so I can tune it on my 2-wheel drive dyno. So stay tuned for that. I'm super excited to see how this thing does in the dyno, and hope you guys are too. So Like always, if you've enjoyed this video, do me a favor, hit the like button. If you haven't already, consider subscribing, and stay tuned for the next video because we're gonna put this thing on a dyno and see how much it makes. So thanks again for watching, guys, and I'll see you again soon. Bye now.